So can I just ask you, what goes into actually tracking a mountain lion?
What goes into tracking a mountain lion? You mean as a researcher, or?
Sort of the process that you go through when you either have to capture one for scientific research.
Sure.
Where do you start, and what's the rough guide of the process? Are you just following kind of evidence and signs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like, how do we find them and how do we catch them? And so you literally do begin a lot with field skills, basic skills, footprints, scats, scrapes, some of the things that were talked about in the film, which I would encourage you to include more of, because they're something I could look at, or other cat people could look at and say, that is either a cat's track or it's a dog track, and I get that a lot from the Northeast, that very question. But yeah, I mean, you wander the landscape. When you've worked with the species long enough, just as deer people begin to look at the landscape and be able to predict where deer would likely be, we can do that with mountain lions, and that's nothing magical. That's just saying that you follow enough mountain lions and you tend to see them use certain landscape features. And so we start there, and we can look for the places where we would expect to see them mark their territories or leave obvious sign. But, in snow country, it's much easier because you literally can drive around at that speed and be looking for tracks and trails and things like that. But that's how I usually begin. As I wander around, I look for tracks and sign. If I'm using traps, I might use bait, or I trap along a travel route. Cats are quite predictable, so that's something to think about as well. They're just to throw some biology at you. Generally, cats they set up a home range, right, or a territory, and even when that cat is removed, the next cat that comes in often fits in the same home range. So the replacement male or the replacement female. And you'll do, of course, there's some change, but it's amazing how often they do fill in just exactly where the last cat was. And for that reason, cat hunters will tell you this right away, that they check the same places every year for cat sign, because they know that even if they've killed that cat, the next one that comes in will probably leave sign in a very similar place. And so we do the same thing as researchers. We kind of check the same zones. We get to know where they move, and we just check them regularly, and we can bait along them, we can trap along them. And then, in the United States, we use hounds quite a bit. So these are dogs that are trained to follow them by scent. And, that would be, in my opinion, the best way to approach the question in the UK. If you really want to know if there are big cats there, you bring a hound team out and have them work these landscapes, and they'll chase things up trees if they hit the right scent. And a lot of these dogs are trained well enough that they're not going to run after any deer or whatever they cross. They're going to only run when they hit a cat trail. And so you'll find out what's at the end of that trail. And that's exactly how they found them in Florida. So, yeah, I mean, that's some of the reasons we get started. We find footprints. And that brings me back to that earlier point that there is evidence to find if there are mountain lions out there.
But is there anything that you saw where you think, that's actually a little bit kind of peculiar, not something you'd expect to see in a landscape that doesn't have apex predators?
A couple of my thoughts watching the film. There was a lot of talk about black cats. And just so we're pretty blunt, there has never ever been a black mountain lion, true evidence. There are anecdotes of black mountain lions from the 1800s, but when you think about how many thousands of mountain lions have been killed and held in the hands since that time by hunters, by taxidermists, by ranchers, by anything, across their range, and that there's never been a black one, I think it's safe to say that there aren't black mountain lions. Now, there are black jaguars and there are black leopards, and in fact there are very rare black bobcats and other black small cats. So the second people start talking about black mountain lions, I always am a little bit like, oh boy, here we go. And in fact, it's one of the things to bring back to Mark McCullough's report. 1/3 of the sightings that still occur every year in the northeast of the United States are black mountain lions. Not just mountain lions, but black ones. And those, of course, are slightly harder to digest if they really think they're pumas. So that's just one thing to consider. A couple of things that jumped out at me. So a bunch of the photos in the film, of these bulky black things without a tail. You can't see the tail. Whew, I have no idea what those were, honestly. But they weren't mountain lions. They weren't pumas, I can tell you that. Early in the film, there was a woman talking about watching a cat walk by close and that the tail swished side to side. Cats don't do that. They don't swish side to side. So that right away in my head was like, well, that's probably not a cat. They hold their tail straight out behind them. If they're stopped and watching something, they'll twitch their tail on occasion. But if they're moving, it's behind them. It does not move.
Sure.
Let's see. All the horses coming together, certainly. So at around 7:50, there was talk about how the horses were responding to the presence of predators and that they were grouping up in the open. That is something that could be evidence of a large predator nearby, for sure. It doesn't rule out that predator isn't dogs, but it does say that there could be a reaction to danger. There was an interesting speculation about the winter of 2010 being the cutoff for sightings because it was such a brutal winter. I speak more about pumas since that's my job, but we have pumas that live in that country. I worked for years in Wyoming, and every year we had winters that cold. Pumas do have very thin fur compared to many species, but they can survive in that country, in that temperature. But it is brutal on cats, and it does kill cats. So it's an interesting hypothesis, and I wouldn't outright say no way. But cats can survive in that cold. The thing that I thought was one of the more convincing was the dead sheep, and that the livestock owner, you could see it was a throat, a suffocation, and that when he skinned it out, he seemed to have evidence of claw marks, meaning like that the animal mounted from the back end. And that's exactly what a lot of cats do, is they'll grab their prey, pull forward, and slip beneath and grip the throat, and they suffocate it here. Throat killing doesn't rule out foxes and other species. They can kill by the throat. It doesn't say that it's not a lynx versus a puma versus a leopard. Any of those could do it. If it's in an area where there's known to be lynx or anything, it could be that. But the fact that there was claw marks on the back, like pulling up to get to that position, is very cat-like. So dogs typically don't kill sheep by the throat. Dogs tend to make a mess when they kill sheep. There's a lot of biting on the ears. There's a lot of biting on the tail. Down the sides, they often bite right at the back of the rib cage and the stomach. And that was very cleanly done. So I would rule, didn't have evidence of dogs, and so possible cat sign. The sick deer, the deformed animal philosophy that was talked about, like that cats really preferentially select for the sick, the dying, the old, is not cats at all. Cats are opportunistic. Again, speaking to mountain lions, they preferentially select young animals. So young deer, young elk, or what you call red deer, young feral hogs, young pigs. They like the smaller, more vulnerable prey, but they are certainly healthy. Or they might be sick. It doesn't matter. It's opportunistic. But there's no evidence that they go after these sort of animals in trouble. The clamping the nose. So that person, they kept talking about how the nose was clamped down. Mountain lions do that occasionally. And you'll see that once in a while with a deer, they'll get on an elk and just take it down. It's in my experience, it's certain individual cats will, pick up a technique like that, but it's not common for mountain lions. It is far more common for jaguars, and in fact, they look at that sign in a lot of Latin America to differentiate puma from jaguar taking cattle, is to see if it's been clamped on the front. So that's something to consider. There was talk about then the roadkill. That was an interesting one, right? So this broken animal on the roadside. Can't believe that this person didn't pick up the skull. You got bones in front of you. My God, would have been the first thing I did was pick it up, because that would have told you one way or the other. And I honestly, I just couldn't tell. I was trying to see enough of the teeth and the structure, but you could see the head was crushed and things were a little weird. It looked like it had a short face, which would be very cat-like. It had long canines, meaning those these teeth, the four teeth at the corners are called canines. They were long and slender, which is very cat-like, but that's true of red foxes. I mean, not that it couldn't be a dog, but it's less likely a domestic dog if it's disproportionately longer than the other teeth, which, it was hard to tell from the photo. He said the tail was 4 feet long, which is way too long for a puma. They average sort of 2.5 feet. 4 foot that's a long, long tail. But that may have been from memory. Everyone's memories are poor. So, the color was weird, but gosh, would have been nice if he had picked up the skull. Because if you had shown me the bones, I could definitely tell you what it was. Camera trapping. So there was a lot of talk about camera trapping. I just thought I'd share a couple of things as a biologist. One is, when you set your camera, where you set it is really important. And just to share an anecdote, there was great when Alan Rubinowitz, he's now deceased, but was an early jaguar researcher, and he tells these great stories of going, and his job was to count jaguars in Belize, and he was setting these cameras, and he just never get photos. And he finally employed local people with local knowledge who knew what they were doing in the jungle. And he said sometimes they would move the camera 10 yards, 20 yards, and suddenly, boom, they're getting pictures. And so camera placement's important, and you actually have to know kind of where to put it. So, for instance, I would use your logging roads and your dirt roads and anything like that. Those are prime. Those are prime cat travel routes. You should use those. Don't just randomly put them in the woods. That's not how you get cats. The other thing is, how long do you leave it? So getting back to our talk about how big a home range is for a cat, it may be, you may have put it right where you've got multiple tracks of cats that are clear as a day. Cats move through here. But it still may take weeks for that cat to come back. And sometimes 6 weeks. If it moves into another area, it kills a big elk or something, eats there for a week, then it moves, and a couple weeks later it kills another big one. So it may be 6 weeks before it comes back to that spot. So if you put your camera out and you're like, I'll leave it for a week, that doesn't mean that there's not a cat there if you didn't get a photo. So something to consider. Let's see, we got at 22, that was the older gentleman with the gun collection. He was a lovely character. Then we had the dead lynx, which clearly is a lynx, so that was easy. There was that running footage of something super fast, chasing the deer, and you could see a deer tail flip on the front animal. I have no idea what that was. Could it have been a cat? Sure. When they run, they do kind of stay at one level. You don't go like that. So you see this very smooth, and that's what that animal was, but it was a blur. I have no idea what it was, but it could have been a cat, sure. The
also could have been either other species, deer, large dog.
You bet. Any of those things could have been. Any of those things. Okay, so now we get to the end here. So the boar kill. So So again, wonderful, wonderful people. Clearly people who spend a lot of time outside. The boar kill itself, it was, the footage that's in the film, first off, I'm assuming someone sliced it up. Is that true? Do you know if someone sliced up to open up the area? Because there's this very clean line with fur on both sides. And if that's not true, then I'm going to tell you someone did do that. Someone cut open that animal. So, it's not mentioned in the film, so you might want to mention it, that yes, we opened it up to...
As far as I'm aware, that boar is exactly how they found it.
Okay. So it looks to me like that has had a knife run up the section here. When they point it inside, one of the things you can clearly see is the backbone with the ribs coming out, right? And then they point to the edge of the ribs and say, look, it's been cleanly sheared. That is not cat. When a cat shears the ribs, it literally goes along the backbone. So you'll see right up along the backbone is these beautifully clean clips. Now, that's again talking about pumas, mountain lions. For bobcats, they don't do that. It's much more ragged, and there's usually some chunks of rib. They just don't have the musculature and the teeth to really do a clean job on such a big animal. And of course, they wouldn't take down a big animal like that. The other things I would say about that kill is there was the poop, the segmented poop. That really did look like a cat's scat. It really did, So the other weird thing I would point out is the hole marks with the teeth that were, this long. So first of all, there's no cat except the saber-toothed cat that had teeth that long. Those holes, I have never seen punctures like that on a kill before. And I've seen 2,500 mountain lion kills at this point, maybe approaching 3,000 now. They just, they're hard to see. You have to look for them, and, you find them in the fur, and then you can see a hole. Usually you skin out the animal to really see where the hemorrhaging is occurring, to find those holes. Well, when you see holes like that, it almost looks like someone had drilled them, like creating sign, truly.
They almost look like a bobbling pool.
Yeah, and perfectly round, and it was just like so bizarre. And, the kill was super fresh. And occasionally, the reason I mention that is that occasionally when a kill is old, the holes will stretch as insects use them to get in, or a bird beak is jammed in there as well as an entrance point. But generally that's on an old kill, and you can see that the fur's starting to slough and stuff like that. This was a fresh kill. The kill itself, to me, was completely unconvincing. The poop was very much looked like a cat's scat. So that's what I'd have to say about that.
Very, very interesting.
And then the other thing that those people brought up was, that they know forest rangers who found dead cats and are told to shut up. First of all, I don't believe that at all, that anyone could keep their mouth shut if they were finding dead big cats. People would know, it's just human nature, right? But the other thing it's made me want to talk about is that finding a dead mountain lion or a dead bobcat is so rare. It's really hard to find a dead animal, a dead cat that dies in any sort of natural way. They seek out the most private places on the landscape, dense woods, shrubbery, rock overhangs under a log, to curl up and die. You find dead cats when they're hit by cars or they're killed by people, meaning they're shot, they're trapped, whatever. That's when you find carcasses. But as someone who has literally followed mountain lions for 20 years, I've found a dead mountain lion, that wasn't killed by a person. I don't know if I've ever found one that wasn't shot I've found lots of dead mountain lions, but, that was just a natural death, except when, of course, they are with a GPS collar, and so I can go and find them. I've never found one just out. But those that have died from disease or other natural causes, you won't believe the places they pick to die and curl up. They're always hidden And, it's just funny. I was just down in Patagonia talking to the puma guides. These guys are out every day watching pumas, watching them. And they over and over ask me, why don't we ever find dead pumas? Why aren't they just out here? And I'm like, because they hide to die. They hide to die. So finding dead pumas, again, it just struck me as something as, no, people don't find dead pumas. They just don't. And if they do, they certainly don't keep their mouth shut. That to me seemed an odd thing to state. And I think that is my full wrap up of my commentary on the film.